Hi, I'm Kristen Amron, bar manager of Dragonfly Sushi.
And I'm Andrew Amron, owner of the Ice Doctor.
We're coming to you from our beautiful home here in Gainesville, Florida.
And we've been asked to talk to you guys about the different types of ice and how they affect cocktails.
And I'll be using that ice to show you how to make a wonderful highball cocktail. But first, let's get started. Take it away, Ice Doctor.
Hey guys, first I'd like to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to get dressed today. It's been an interesting couple of weeks, but this is great. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the history of ice in cocktails, the different types of ice that you can use in cocktails, and how to make some clear ice at home. And then I'll hand it off to Kristen, who's going to teach you guys how to make a wonderful highball cocktail. So first, the history of ice in cocktails. In the 15 or 20 years following the US Civil War, we're probably looking around the 1870s, 1880s, and 1890s as the country rebuilt itself. One of the most important things to happen was the reconstruction of railroad system across the United States and the development of refrigeration. Those two things allowed ice to be harvested from frozen lakes in the winter in places like Maine and Wisconsin and Minnesota. And those large blocks of ice could then be shipped down to places like sunny Florida and New Orleans and even across to California. And that allowed the golden age of American cocktails to really take off. A lot of people think that great cocktails came out of the Prohibition era, but it's actually the 20 or 30 years prior to that. If you really think about it, during Prohibition, when alcohol was banned, you couldn't access the types of products that were needed to make really great cocktails. The era before that, where you've got refrigerated train cars bringing ice all over the country and a wonderful expression of spirits coming from overseas and being developed here in the United States, you have the development of things, of cocktails like the Old Fashioned, the Manhattan. Tons of really wonderful cocktails came out of this golden era from, let's say, the 1880s to maybe the 19-teens, before the United States really got embroiled in World War I. So with that in mind, paying attention to what ice does in a cocktail is really important. In front of you, there's a few different kinds of ice. We've got two large format pieces of ice. We've got cubes and we've got Collins rocks for tall, skinny glasses. And then we also have pebbled ice. The most important thing to kind of focus on here is the amount of surface area in each of these types of ice, because that's what's going to make ice melt faster or slower in your drink. If you've got a drink that you want to not water down, you need your ice to not melt that fast. We've all been there. We've all had a drink after 5 minutes. It's completely watered down. It's really not that great anymore. And that's because the ice and what type of ice is being used. The bigger the piece of ice and the more dense it is, the slower it's going to melt. So it'll still cool your drink down without watering it down. Large format pieces of ice will allow that to happen. Smaller pieces of ice, like pebbled ice, are fantastic for really strong drinks that you want to water down over time and you want them to get really cold really fast. They've got a much larger surface area compared to their volume. So that's going to allow that small piece of ice to water down and cool your drink. You'll see pebbled ice used a lot with tiki drinks that are very overproofed. It's fantastic because it'll allow you to drink that drink without falling out of your bar stool. The other thing that makes ice really important to a cocktail, and this is something that I'll teach you guys how to do in a little bit, is the clarity of the ice. The ice that comes out of your freezer, you'll often notice is cloudy. And it's not really because there's a lot of impurities in there. Most of us are running some sort of filter on our ice makers in our freezer. If you try to make ice at home just by pouring water into an ice mold, it's going to come out cloudy. And that's because there's a handful of gases that are naturally dissolved in water at standard temperature and pressure. Those gases include oxygen and nitrogen. You don't see them, but when ice freezes, all of those gases form small bubbles. And as ice freezes, typically, it'll freeze from all of the outer surfaces and it'll make a hard shell, and then it'll compress all of those gases into the middle. That's why your ice at home is cloudy, and that cloudy spot tends to be in the center of the ice cube that you guys are making. In order to make clear ice, you have to control where those air bubbles are going. Boiling water isn't going to help you here. That doesn't really do anything. You just need to start with really great tasting water, filtered through a Brita pitcher or something like that, just to remove any impurities to make the water taste better. And then you need to think about how that ice is actually freezing. So instead of having it freeze on all sides at once, you want to tell those air bubbles where to go. You can do this at home by getting a hard plastic igloo cooler that'll fit in your freezer. Leave the top open on it and fill it with filtered water. Because the sides and the bottom are insulated, that water will only freeze from that open surface on top, and it'll push all of the air bubbles down to a layer in the bottom instead of into the middle. After a couple days, the whole thing will be frozen. You can take it out, flip it over, and there's going to be a layer of bubbles, and the rest of the block, maybe 75% of it, will be crystal clear. Then you can go to town, break it up with an ice pick if you have one. If you don't, a good kitchen knife is something that you might be able to use, but you can break that down into pieces that will fit in a cocktail glass, and they'll be clear and large and melt really slowly for you. Again, this is all about controlling how fast or slow you want that ice to melt to maintain the quality of your cocktail. At the Ice Doctor, we do that same process on an industrial scale. We start with a 300-pound block, and because it's only freezing from one direction and we've got a pump that circulates the water, the entire block comes out crystal clear, and we break it down into cubes and columns rocks and spheres and all kinds of other stuff, and we distribute that all over North Central Florida. So look for us at some of your favorite cocktail bars all over the place. And one of those is at Dragonfly right here in Gainesville, and I'll hand this off to Kristen, and she's going to show you guys how to make a really great spit on a highball.
Hey all, I'm back. And now I'm going to show you how to make Dragonfly's twist on a classic highball, the only time we tell. Of course, using Andy's wonderful ice he just talked to you about. But first, let's talk about what a highball actually is. A highball is a long mixed drink containing a spirit and a refreshing mixer. Now this spirit could be any type of spirit you prefer, really any type of mixer you prefer, as long as you stick to the golden rule, 1 part strong to 3 parts weak. Now for the purpose of this video, we're going to be doing a classic whiskey highball. In this case, being from Dragonfly, we're using Japanese whiskey. But don't worry if you don't have Japanese whiskey, you can totally use any type of scotch you have in your back bar. This is really up to your preference. Now, what you'll need for this cocktail is, like I said, whiskey, thyme honey, club soda. If you don't have club soda, you can always use distilled or tonic or mineral water, just depending on the flavor you're trying to get. But for this particular cocktail, I recommend the club soda and a little bit of saline for a bit of salinity. You'll also need a tall glass. I'm using a 10-ounce glass. A small mixing tin, but if you don't have a mixing tin, feel free to use a rocks glass. Of course, a spoon to do a little mixing, a jigger, because the whole point of a highball is to make sure you're watching the proportions in it. You want to make sure it's a low ABV cocktail. Low ABV meaning low alcohol by volume, because you want to be able to have more than one. It's supposed to be a nice refreshing cocktail that you can enjoy without getting too crazy. You also need a lemon wheel and a little bit of thyme. Now let's get started. So I'm going to start with adding the wonderful ice that Andy, the ice doctor, just told us about. And in my small mixing tin, I'm going to do 2 ounces of the Japanese whiskey. Then I'm going to do a 1/4 ounce of thyme honey. Now thyme honey is really easy to make. You're going to need a cup of honey and a cup of water that you just dissolve over heat. You add about 6 or 7 sprigs of the awesome thyme. I love thyme. And you just let it simmer for about 5 minutes. Once it's cooled, you just get rid of that thyme sprig and just go ahead and use it for whatever you want. It's really tasty for pretty much anything. Now for this, I'm just using a 1/4 ounce because the Centauri Toki actually has a lot of kind of sweeter honey notes as it is. What I'm using this for is to draw out more of those flavors, and the thyme is going to bring out some really nice earthy notes to it. Now I'm going to give it a little bit of a stir without ice because I just kind of want to do a quick infusion of those flavors. And of course, if you notice, I put the ice in first. I want to let this ice temper a little bit. If you don't have this awesome ice at home, have no fear. You can either call the ice doctor, he'll be happy to bring it to you, or you can just use your awesome fridge ice. Whatever's to your disposal, basically. So we're gonna just pour this mixture over this ice. And you always wanna make sure you pour over ice all the time because it's gonna keep it from diluting too much. Then we're gonna add a little bit of saline. Saline is really easy to make. You can do about 8 ounces of water to about 1 ounce of salt. Let it dissolve over heat, and once it's cooled, you can use it. Put it in a nice little dropper bottle. What this does is just brings out a little bit of salinity. It really gives you like a nice little tingle on your tongue. I'm gonna do about 4 drops of that. And then I'm gonna fill with my soda water. So it's nice, bubbly, and refreshing. It's about, for this glass, it's about 5 ounces to the mixture I just put in. I'm gonna give it a nice little stir so I can really foam up all those awesome bubbles in there. And of course, the complementing flavors of my lemon wheel and a couple sprigs of thyme. And there you have it. The only time we tell. Really nice and refreshing on a hot summer day in Gainesville. That's it for us. I'm Kristen Amron of Dragonfly Sushi.
And I'm Andrew Amron, owner of the Ice Doctor. Thank you guys so much for joining us today.
And remember, wash your hands,
Practice social distancing,
support your local businesses,
and drink responsibly. Cheers!